You've been treated like you're worthless, just for asking for help, as if his hunger were a shame, his pain was uncomfortable, and his presence a mistake. Today, you will learn the story of an orphan girl who only wanted one thing, a stale loaf of bread. It was not a luxury. It was not alms. It was hunger. It was survival. She walked into a bakery with her eyes downcast, her hands dirty with dust, and her stomach growling. He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask for attention. He only asked in a low voice, "Do you have bread from yesterday? Can I take what's left?" But the response he received was like a stab. It didn't come from the owner. It came from his daughter, well-dressed, nose up, mocking smile, garbage from the street. That's what you are. Pause. Breathe. Because from here, what you will see can change your way of looking at the other. This true story is not just about hunger. It's about humiliation, about how life tests the humble, about how prejudice can be where we least expect it, and about how sometimes the greatest miracles appear from where no one imagines. Have you ever been there? Have you ever felt ashamed to ask for something simple, just because the world judged you before hearing your voice? Stay with me until the end, because this story is more than exciting. It is a slap in the face of those who have forgotten what empathy is. While that girl was offended in front of everyone, a mysterious figure watched in silence. An elegant man with a firm look who said nothing but what he did right after will give you goosebumps. What if I told you that this man was once as poor as she was? What if I told you that he knew, firsthand, the taste of a stale loaf of bread divided into four? What happens in the next few minutes is the turn that turns pain into hope. It is living proof that no one should be judged by appearance, clothing, or being on the ground, because whoever is asking today, tomorrow may be the one who helps, and who humiliates today. You may need compassion when it's too late. This is the story of the bread of shame, but it is also the story of the bread of dignity, from the bread of justice. If this message is already touching your heart, just leave a like now, and subscribe to the channel, so you don't miss any story like this. Here, every word is an invitation for you to reflect, feel, and share with those who need a little more humanity on the day. Now, hold firm, because what will happen after that innocent request? It will surprise you. Life followed its fast pace that late afternoon, and the bakery seemed to be the beating heart of the neighborhood. Glass doors open and close all the time, bells tinkling with each new customer, conversations interspersed with quick and hurried orders. The smell of hot bread dominated the environment like an invisible mist that embraced those who entered, bringing an almost nostalgic feeling of comfort, of home, of childhood. It was impossible to ignore that golden aroma wafting from the freshly baked batches, the steaming baguettes, and the brightly topped sweetbreads that shimmered under the light of the window. The shelves were full. Everything was organized to the millimeter. Croissants, tubes, brioches, donuts. The sheen of the butter still oozed from some. The cashier was talking absent-mindedly with someone on her cell phone, a loud laugh escaping the middle of an incomprehensible sentence. The baker behind the countertop cleaned the stainless steel table with automatic movements, as if he had repeated that choreography so many times that he no longer thought about it. A radio in the corner played an old song, muffled by the noises of everyday life. Coins falling, paper bags being opened, voices overlapping. Everything seemed ordinary. Everything seemed to be in place. But on the outside, there was a universe apart. The sidewalk boiled with hurried footsteps, horns, loose conversations. And there, almost glued to the glass of the window, she watched. He had been there for a long time, but no one noticed. It was as if it were part of the landscape, the lamppost, the tree, the shadow of the afternoon. But there was something about her that caught the attention, not of those who passed by, but of those who stopped to really look. The look, a look of someone who not only saw the bread, but felt the smell of it enter the soul. A hungry look, but not only a stomach look, a look of absence, of those who have had little, of those who have lost a lot, of those who still expect something from life, even without knowing what. The coat was too big. It must have been someone much bigger, maybe an adult who is gone. He was frayed, his sleeves covering even his fingers, the hair tied with a worn elastic band, the disheveled strands denouncing sleepless nights. The leaky sneakers seemed to scream to attentive eyes, but no one was looking. The world has learned to ignore what hurts. She kept her body close to the glass, not because she wanted to go in, but perhaps for fear of getting in the way. I watched the movements inside like someone watching a movie, the bread being cut, the child catching a stuffed dream, the woman choosing a bag of imported cookies, the man complaining about the price of cheese. To her, it all seemed distant, unreal, as if he belonged to another dimension, as if that world wasn't made for someone like her. Time outside seemed slower. Her every step was measured, every gesture restrained. I didn't want to draw attention. On the contrary, she wanted to go unnoticed, as someone who approaches a place where she knows she is not welcome. But still, there was courage in his eyes, something that could not be erased, as if, even among the ruins, she carried a glimmer of hope. The door of the bakery opened once again. Someone came out, laughing loudly, with a bag of freshly baked bread in his hands. The bell rang. The girl took a deep breath, and her eyes turned to the ground. One step, then another. She crossed the door. Inside, no one noticed. Or they pretended not to notice. The eyes that ignored her outside continued to look away. The sound of the music did not stop. The cashier continued the conversation, now with an expression of impatience. The baker dried his hands with the dirty cloth, while he peered distractedly at his cell phone on the counter. And she, small, slight, with her shoulders hunched as if carrying an invisible weight, approached slowly. The bakery environment, so familiar to some, seemed hostile to her. The clean floor reflected the white light. The brightness of the window contrasted with the opacity of her faded clothes. And yet she kept going. There was no arrogance in her steps, nor hurry, just a deep silence, a silence that screamed. It was like watching a moment that, in itself, said a lot, a brutal contrast between abundance and need, between the automatic and the essential, between the daily life of those who live and the urgency of those who survive. And even before any words were spoken, the air was already carrying an almost palpable tension. It was as if the space was divided. On one side, indifference. On the other, the pure, raw need exposed in the form of a child who should not be there. At least, that is what many thought. But who decides where someone should or shouldn't be? This question hovered invisibly between the shells of bread and the indifferent expressions. And there she was, standing there, looking around, looking perhaps for a sign, a gesture, a look that would say, "You are not alone." But no one said anything. Still, do you believe that everything happened for a reason? Right here what you think about it. The sound of her footsteps was barely audible. Even so, it seemed to echo in the consciousness of anyone who was minimally attentive to that scene. The girl approached the counter as if stepping on sacred ground, not out of reverence, but out of fear of breaking the little that remains. The cloth of his coat swayed slowly, following his restrained movements. The eyes, which had previously wandered to the window as if asking permission to exist, now stared into the emptiness in front of them. And for a moment, time seemed to slow down, as if the outside world had pressed the brakes to hear what would come next. She stopped, right in front of the counter where the most expensive breads were piled up, where the golden croissants seemed to smile on those who could buy them. The cashier girl, still holding her cell phone, noticed the girl's presence with a slight raise of her eyebrow, but said nothing. He just waited. Maybe I thought she was going to ask for information. Perhaps he thought he would soon get out of there on his own. But that was not what happened. The girl took a deep breath, and in a voice so low that it almost got lost in the hum of the air conditioning, in the rustle of papers, in the distant hubbub of the city, she said, "Girl, do you have yesterday's bread? Can I take what's left?" The question was suspended in the air, not because of the complexity, but because of the absurd simplicity. So direct, so unprotected, so raw. It was a small request, but with a weight that crushed. There was no demand, no drama, just a thread of voice that trembled between fear and hope. Those words carried not only hunger, but history, scarring, behind the scenes of a reality that no one inside had any idea about. It was as if the whole universe had stopped for a few seconds just to listen to it. The cashier hesitated. The conversation on the cell phone stopped. Her gaze, previously distracted, now seemed to try to decipher what she had just heard. But there was nothing to decipher. The girl had been clear. He did not ask for alms. He didn't cry. It didn't dramatize. I just wanted to know if there was anything left. A rest, a surplus, something that, for many, would no longer have value, but that, for her, could mean everything. The baker, still with the cloth in his hands, looked up. I wasn't prepared for that. No one was. There was a strangeness in the environment now, an invisible presence that bothered, a discomfort that exposed others more than the girl herself. Because there, in that short sentence, there was a profound revelation. What is little for some can be everything for others. And it's not a pretty catchphrase. It's a real impact, a reflection of inequality that hides in the corners of everyday life, where a forgotten loaf of bread at the bottom of a tray can be, for someone, the only meal of the day. She stood still, waiting for the answer. He did not insist. He didn't press. She just waited, with her eyes fixed on the counter, as if she had become accustomed to being ignored, but still chose to try one more time. There was a kind of silent, almost invisible force that only those who have ever had to fight for crumbs understand. A courage that is born not of pride, but of necessity, and that shapes the mentality of those who have learned to walk between absences. The silence was uncomfortable. Some customers looked at each other. Others pretended they didn't listen. The music on the radio continued to play in the background, out of touch with reality, like a soundtrack that insists on being cheerful while the scene before your eyes collapses inside. The cashier finally hung up the phone. The gesture in itself already seemed significant. She looked at the girl again. He really did, not only with the eyes, but with something deeper, as someone who, for the first time, allows himself to see beyond what is on the surface. And it was in this look, in this brief moment of humanity, that everything began to change. Because it wasn't just a piece of bread there. It wasn't about the food itself. It was about what he stood for. It was about the right to ask, the right to exist, the right to occupy that space without being chased away. It was about dignity. And when this is revealed, when the hidden truth of one's life comes to light without fanfare, without big words, with just a simple sentence, one cannot help but feel touched. The impact of that request was greater than any speech. He disarmed. It took people out of the comfort of routine. It forced a pause and a hurry. It opened up how much we are used to following, consuming, running, without looking away, without noticing the small requests around us. And often, what changes everything is not a grand gesture, but the choice to listen, the choice to stop. The girl was still there, waiting, not as someone who demands, but as someone who trusts, even without knowing if he can, like someone who bets on a simple gesture from someone on the other side of the counter, as someone who believes that there are still decisions that change the course of story. It was a quiet but powerful confidence, that kind of faith that is born when everything has been taken away, except hope. And even though no one had yet moved, there was already something different in the air, a kind of internal, subtle transformation that began to spread, as if that question had left a mark, an invisible trail, as if each person there was now forced to look at themselves in the mirror of their own indifference. It was just a request. Is that it? A bread from yesterday. But those who were really attentive knew this was not about the bread. It never was. Have you ever experienced something similar? Tell us here in the comments. I really want to know your story. The scene inside the bakery, hitherto muffled by the girl's silent expectation, suddenly broke with a harsh, cold scream, as if that space, until then immersed in a silent tension, had been invaded by a wave of contempt. The owner's daughter, impeccable looking, with her hair neatly arranged in an expensive dress that seemed to glow in the ambient light, approached with firm steps and a look that did not hide her repulsion. She looked at the girl as if she were an unwanted shadow, something that disturbed the orderly and perfect beauty of that place. The silence lasted for a few seconds, but the weight of the situation was on every inch of the room. And then, with a voice full of disdain and an expression of absolute indifference, the owner's daughter snapped, without hesitation, without any remorse, "You're the garbage on the street. Get out of here." Those words, loaded with cruelty, seemed to pierce the girl like a sharp blade. The air inside the bakery became heavy, and sad music began to play softly, as if the whole room felt the pain of that public humiliation. The girl's gaze, before anyone who tried to understand, was now lost, as if a wave of incredulity had covered her expression. There was no immediate reaction. There was no attempt to defend himself or to apologize. There was no more strength for that. All she felt was the weight of that contempt, heavy as a stone that is placed on her chest. She stood still staring at the floor, her shoulders slumped, as if the world had fallen apart in that single moment. The word garbage echoed in his mind, repeating itself in an endless cycle, like a cruel mantra. It was a word that was not only about her present condition, but about a permanent state, as if that was what she would always be: garbage, something worthless, something that has no place in any other space except in oblivion behind the scenes of everyday life. The other customers of the bakery, who were previously distracted, began to realize the situation. Some looked uncomfortable, but they did nothing. Others didn't even look, prefer to go about their routine, as it were a distorted and unimportant scene. But for the girl, the pain of that word was beyond what anyone could understand. It wasn't just about what she heard, but about what she was already experiencing. It was about the years of abandonment. It was about the constant hunger, loneliness, and closed doors she encountered at every turn. But what hurt most was not the contempt of the owner's daughter. It was the fact that this humiliation was done in front of the others. It was public, exposed, as if someone wanted to shout to the whole world that she was worthless. And perhaps that was what made her even more paralyzed. The weight of shame, something so profound that it made her feel that she no longer deserved to exist there. The moment the words came out of the mouth of the owner's daughter, it was not only the girl who was pushed into the corner. All who were there, even those who were just watching, were forced to face the reality of the indifference and contempt with which life treats certain human beings. But there's something more cruel about this kind of humiliation, something that goes beyond the spoken word. What really hurts is not only the insult, but the impossibility of reaction, the feeling of helplessness in the face of a situation that is out of control. And for those who are in a position of vulnerability, where dignity has already been wounded in so many ways, these words are like the last push. They break something very deep inside the person. They nullify hope. They make one's heart shrink. The hardest part of all this is to realize that the owner's daughter probably never imagined the impact of his words. She didn't know that in that simple gesture of contempt, she was leaving a mark for life. But at the same time, perhaps that was what she wanted. To make it clear that for her, the girl was nothing more than a nuisance, something that could be easily dismissed. And as that sounded, the whole room seemed to align with that thought. The way everyone seemed to move away, the looks they looked away, the relaxed smiles that dissipated in the air, all contributed to a single feeling: that the girl shouldn't be there, that she had no right to occupy that space. But deep down, it wasn't just the girl who was being rejected. It was the humanity of each one there that was being put to the test. Because when a person is publicly humiliated, when someone is treated as if they were invisible, the issue is no longer about them, but about others. They are the ones who need to decide whether to turn their backs or somehow react. Would anyone stand up and try to stop that cycle of indifference? Or would it be easier to settle down and let the girl be one more among society's disposables? At that moment, she didn't know that her story was about to take another turn, but something inside her was beginning to form, something silent but powerful. It wasn't just the pain of being called garbage. It was something bigger, something she still didn't understand, but that one day, somehow, the revelation would come, and this transformation would begin in those moments of loneliness, of contempt. Because just as despair can break a person, it can also be the spark for something much deeper. Something that might have been difficult to perceive at that time, but which, over time, would become visible to everyone. The bakery's environment, still impregnated with the echo of humiliation, seemed to have frozen in time. But in the opposite corner, there was something that went unnoticed, something that I observed without being seen. A man. He was there, sitting discreetly at one of the furthest tables, with an upright posture and a calm gaze. He didn't seem to be someone who was just there to have a coffee or buy a loaf of bread. There was something different about him, a touch of mystery in the way he analyzed every movement of those people. He was elegant. His costume, while simple, had a touch of sophistication. A well-cut jacket, an impeccable white shirt and tie that, although discreet, carried with an aura of subtle power. But it was not his way of dressing that drew attention. It was the way he kept silent, taking in every detail around him, as if he was seeing something beyond what others could perceive. While the girl, still disconcerted by the humiliation, struggled with shame and pain, and while the owner's daughter walked away with a sarcastic smile on her face, the man did not move. His gaze remained fixed but unhurried. There was no sign of distress or concern on his face, as if he were watching a scene that he somehow already knew. There was something about his expression that conveyed a sense of control, as if he understood the game unfolding before his eyes, something that the others, at that moment, could not comprehend. What intrigued me most, however, was the absolute silence around him. Not an uncomfortable stillness, but a complete calm, as if he were a distant but present observer, who knew that, at that moment, everything that happened was already, in some way, predestined. He didn't need to intervene. He didn't need to stand up and apologize on behalf of the girl, or confront the owner's daughter. His demeanor spoke louder than any word he could utter. It was as if he had understood, deep down, the silent impact of those situations. I knew that true transformation does not come from the words spoken, but from the acts that are done in silence, from those who do not seek recognition or applause, but who have the wisdom to realize that the world does not change because of a direct confrontation, but by the way we choose to deal with what we see and feel. As he watched, his presence seemed to burst into a kind of invisible energy that invaded space. He didn't get up. He didn't react. But his gaze continued to track the girl and the situation with an almost clinical interest. He was there, but at the same time, he seemed to be in a different place, as if I had lived that so many times before. The way he watched her was not one of judgment, but of deep understanding, as if he knew exactly what she was feeling at that moment and what she would be able to do from there. His eyes were fixed on her for a brief moment, and it was in that look that something inside the girl seemed to change, as if that silent presence had touched something hidden inside her, something she didn't know still existed, something strong, something she might need to continue her journey. She didn't know who he was, and that didn't matter, but I felt, somehow, that this figure was different, that he was not there to judge, but to witness the moment in a way that no one else would be able to. The sad music that once took over the environment now seemed to soften, as if the mood was gradually adjusting to a new reality. And this new reality was not in the rude gestures of the owner's daughter or in the indignation of the girl. She was in the subtlety of a look, in the weight of silence. Because, at that moment, it was this man, with his enigmatic posture, who, without saying a word, made the difference. He knew that, as much as words can hurt and humiliate, the real impact of an action is in the way we choose to react to what is imposed on us. It was as if he knew, deep down, that true transformation did not come from the need to expose the truth or fight the system once and for all. It was the way he, with his silence, could move behind the scenes in a way that no one else would be able to. And as the girl struggled with her emotions and the words still resonated in the air, he knew that someday she would find her way through it all. Because, in the end, what really matters is what you do with what happens in silence. What she would choose from that moment on would define the true essence of her journey. What no one knew, but the man seemed to sense, was that simple act of observation, that silence loaded with meaning, could be the first step towards something greater, something that would transcend not only the girl, but everyone around her. He wasn't just there as a spectator. He was part of something that was about to be revealed. The transformation that would come would not be evident immediately, but would begin, little by little, in the small attitudes, in the silent decisions that would shape the journey of all involved. He didn't say a word, but his quiet presence suggested he knew what would happen next. He knew that this moment, although painful, was only at the beginning of something bigger. He had seen it before, in other places, in other stories. But each new journey brought something new, something unique. And now he was waiting, just waiting for what would come next. because he knew, more than anyone, that true change begins when there is nothing left to be said, only done. The man, until then a silent and observant figure, made the movement that no one expected. His gaze fixed on the owner's daughter, who was still there, with arrogance on her face and a mocking smile, seemed to freeze time. He stood up with surprising calm, unhurriedness, as if each step was meticulously calculated. Her presence, which had previously gone unnoticed, now dominated the room, filling the space with an almost palpable tension. The owner's daughter, noticing the movement, looked at him with disdain, not sure what to expect. But what happened next was something she could not have foreseen at all. He approached her with a quiet firmness, and when he finally spoke, his voice, though soft, cut through the air like a sharp blade. "I want to buy everything you have here today." The words fell heavy, but charged with defiant calm. The owner's daughter, who was already used to having control of everything around her, was paralyzed. What was he saying? What did he want with all that bread? He seemed so immersed in his serene posture, so sure of himself, that no one could fully understand the impact of his words, but everyone did. There was an intensity to the moment that transcended the simple act of a purchase. She tried unsuccessfully to disguise her surprise, the expression on her face now oscillating between discomfort and confusion. After all, who was that man? What did he really want? But he didn't wait for her to respond. Without further explanation, he went to the counter, picked up the loaves that were there, still warm, as if each one of them were a symbol of the girl's simplicity, humility, and courage. He picked them up with a delicacy that contrasted with the rudeness of the situation, and, with a look that only he could understand, he addressed the girl. With gentle steps, he approached her, holding out the loaves to her. She looked at him, astonished, not fully understanding what was happening, not knowing how to react. The surprise on the girl's face was visible, but the man's gesture seemed to be a direct response to the pain she had just faced. He looked deep into her eyes, as if he wanted to convey something far beyond words. And then, in a low voice, but charged with rare kindness, he said, "It's all yours, little one." The impact of this moment was immediate. The silence in the air seemed to thicken, as if the whole world had stopped for a moment. Not just the gesture itself, but the way the man spoke, as if he were giving her more than loaves of bread, as if he were offering her something that, until that moment, seemed beyond her reach: dignity, respect, and, perhaps, a glimpse of something greater. Something that didn't come from where she expected, didn't come from the pity of others, but from an unexpected gesture of empathy and understanding. Her gaze, which had previously been marked by shame and pain, now began to soften. She was completely in shock, not knowing how to react to that silent offer of support. There was something transformative about that scene, something that resonated on a deep level, as if that simple exchange of bread was a metaphor for a much bigger journey. The journey of a person who does not allow himself to be defined by circumstances, who knows that, even in the most difficult moments, there's always an opportunity to get back on his feet, to find a new way of looking at the world. The owner's daughter, in turn, was there, frozen in her arrogance, now understanding the impact that this man had just caused. She had not yet realized that the real power was not in what she had or controlled, but in those small actions, which required neither wealth nor power, but rather a different mentality, a silent transformation, which changed everything around him without making a fuss. Meanwhile, the man, with his unwavering calm, turned slowly and walked to the door. He didn't need anything else, because he knew he had already done his part. What he had given the girl could not be bought, nor rewarded. As he left, the sound of his footsteps echoed through the bakery, but his impact still reverberated in the minds of everyone there. The girl, now with the loaves in her hands, stared into the void for a moment, as if she were beginning to understand something that had previously eluded her. She didn't know what the future held for her, but in that instant, there was something different in her perception. Something had changed inside her, and she felt that as difficult as her journey was, she was not alone. The owner's daughter, still speechless, was still there, standing, watching what had just happened. She had been confronted, but in a way she didn't fully understand. The impact of what had happened in that silent scene was beginning to form in her mind, but she still didn't know that this moment would be, for her, too, the beginning of a transformation she might not even know she needed. People sometimes think they can control everything around them with words, with the weight of money, or arrogance. But when silence speaks louder than any speech, when a simple act of kindness and understanding has the power to turn everything upside down, that's when true transformation begins. When, in the end, we are all challenged to look inward and question our own journey. And this moment, this twist that no one expected, would be the trigger for something even bigger, something that was about to happen, without anyone really fully understanding what was about to be revealed. The room became even quieter, the weight of what was happening almost palpable. The man, already at the door, with his hand on the handle, stopped for a moment. He turned again to the owner's daughter, who was still there, loaves in hand, not knowing how to process everything that had just happened. He looked at her with a deeper, more revealing gaze, and his voice, which had previously been quiet and collected, now carried an emotional weight that no one could ignore. "I was once like you. I've been hungry. I've asked for stale bread too." The words he spoke, simple and direct, fell with immense force, reverberating in those who were there. It was as if, by revealing this part of the story, he had removed a mask that until that moment seemed to be the only thing he wore. The man, elegant and seemingly untouchable, now showed himself vulnerable, human. He wasn't just someone who could buy anything. He was someone who had already been somehow broken by life, someone who knew the pain deep in his soul. The owner's daughter, for a brief moment, seemed to have lost her ability to move. She looked at the man with a mixture of incredulity and surprise. He, the man of impeccable behavior, with a firm gaze of almost unattainable appearance, had shared pain that was very much his own. It was as if she suddenly saw the world in a new light, a mirror of her own arrogance, reflecting back to her the human frailty that she had not been able to see until then. And for the girl who was there, the man's words were more than a simple phrase of consolation. They beat deeply, directly in the heart. She looked at him, her face transforming, the tears beginning to form a twinkle in her eyes, as if an unbearable weight was being lifted there, in the face of that gesture of humanity. It wasn't just the bread he gave her. It wasn't just a glance that she exchanged with him, but the key to something much bigger. What he was revealing was not just a story of overcoming. He was showing her that life could be so much more than what it first seemed, that even in the darkest moments, dignity and compassion could be the greatest sources of strength. The people who were there, until then silent, began to realize the weight of the scene. The air was dense, charged with a truth that none of them could ignore anymore. The owner's daughter, who had ridiculed and humiliated the girl, now seemed to be undergoing a subtle but powerful transformation. What once seemed like a scene of humiliation now became a lesson in humility, a clear example that true power is not found in dominating others, but in understanding the pain of others and being able to connect with it without reservation. The man, teary-eyed and voice breaking, continued, as if the emotion he felt was no longer possible to contain. He spoke with the sincerity of someone who had lived the hardship of life, with the experience of someone who had already known what it is to feel helpless and vulnerable. Each word seemed to carry the weight of a trajectory, a journey of struggles that had shaped him, of a truth that he was finally sharing, without fear of exposing himself. "I know what it's like to be without anything. I know what it's like to feel the weight of not having a place to sleep, of not knowing where the next meal will come from. I know what it's like to live with the feeling that life has no mercy. But I learned that, as much as the world is cruel, what we carry inside is what makes us invincible. It doesn't matter where we come from. What matters is where we are going." The man's every word was being absorbed as a profound truth, and the girl, with teary eyes, felt for the first time that she was no longer alone. What he told her was not an empty promise, but rather a powerful revelation that touched on the essence of her daily struggle. He was there in front of her, not only to give her bread, but to deliver a lesson that would change her life forever. Life could be immense in challenges, but it could also be full of possibilities and transformations. And at that moment, the girl's gaze changed. She was no longer just looking at the man in front of her. She was beginning to look inside herself. The weight of shame and pain she felt began to dissolve. She didn't know yet how it would change her life, but she knew that something inside her had already changed irreversibly. The future, which had once seemed hazy and hopeless, now opened up before her like a road with new paths to explore. The owner's daughter, watching that silent exchange, could no longer ignore the transformation that was taking place. The arrogance she had, the superiority she thought she owned, now seemed small compared to the greatness of what was being shared there. She didn't fully understand, but something inside her was beginning to question the way she saw the world and the people around her. The impact of the man's words was creating a crack in her worldview, and she was beginning to realize that maybe it was time to change too. The man, his eyes still teary, gave the girl one last look before turning to leave, the door closing behind him with a soft sound. But his presence, his history, his gesture of pure humanity would continue to echo in that place, stirring everyone who was there, with everyone who had the courage to listen and reflect. The power of his message was beyond words. It was in the depth of the transformation he had caused, not only in the girl, but in everyone who witnessed that revelation. As he walked away, with the image of him slowly getting lost in the street, the words he had left there in the air began to make sense. They were all faced with something much bigger than simple social differences, more than the surface of things. They were facing a change in mentality, an invisible transformation, but a profound impact. And most incredible of all, that man, with his story and his generosity, had made it clear that the greatest revolution begins within each one of us. The scene still reverberated in the air, like a wave spreading after a deep impact. Everyone there, in one way or another, felt the weight of the transformation that had taken place before them. The arrogance of the owner's daughter, once unbeatable, now seemed like a house of cards about to collapse. Each one in the place, whether by shame or reflection, felt that something had changed within them. But what really stood out was the lesson that the elegant man, with his voice choked and his eyes teary, had made clear: never despise those who are where you once were. These words, simple and direct, had the power to dismantle any kind of ego, any kind of superiority that anyone could carry. Because, deep down, we've all been to places we wouldn't want to relive. We have all gone through difficulties, moments of scarcity, situations that have brought us to our knees. But perhaps the greatest truth is that these difficulties, these falls, are the ones that teach the most about true humanity. And the man knew this better than anyone. He, who already knew the weight of a blank stare, the bitter taste of hunger, was now there, not only to share his bread, but to share a wisdom that few have the courage to share. At the other end of the room, the owner's daughter looked small, not physically, but internally. She seemed to be shrunken, no longer from arrogance, but from the awareness of all that had just happened. She had not come across just any man, but someone who, through a simple action, made her look inside herself. The empathy she had never had was now a constant pressure on her chest. He didn't have to give her anything, but he did it, and not only materially, but with something much more valuable. He gave her the chance to see the world beyond her bubble. The contrast between arrogance and true empathy has never been clearer than it was at that moment. The girl's arrogance was not only the result of youth, but of ignorance about the pain of others, of the lack of experience with those who, no matter how hard they tried, could not achieve the minimum dignity she had. But, on the other hand, the man, with his entire life story, showed the transformative power that true empathy can have. He not only understood the pain of the other, but he made himself present, not with pity, but with a genuine gesture of sharing his journey. He knew that, in the end, all the luxury and status he could carry meant nothing if he didn't have a true connection with the people around him, and that, in a silent way, was the key that changed everything. While the owner's daughter found herself questioning her own attitudes, the man was already far away, but his lesson remained impregnated in the air as an undeniable truth. He no longer needed to speak, for his actions spoke louder than any words. In that instant, he became more than just a character in the story. He became the metaphor of transformative mentality, the embodiment of a path that we should all follow, that of humility, of the recognition that no one is above anyone else, that true greatness lies in recognizing the fragility of the other, and from this, offering a friendly arm. As the man walked out the door, the environment changed in subtle but palpable ways. The conversations began to happen in whispers, but now, Instead of gossip or laughter, they were loaded with something deeper. It was as if everyone there had been touched by something invisible but immeasurable. That man, who apparently only wanted to buy bread, had done something much bigger. He had messed with the mentality of everyone who was there, questioning the way they saw the world and the people around them. It was inevitable. Yesterday's arrogance now gave way to today's introspection. What once seemed certain and unquestionable now seemed broken, reconstructed, in a simpler and purer format. Each of those present, although immersed in a silent reflection, knew that this change could not be reversed. What the man had said was not just a direct message, but a hidden truth that everyone was beginning to understand. He was teaching, without saying a word more, that the greatest lesson in life is to recognize that no matter how far you go or how high you climb, everyone has a story, everyone has a pain, everyone has something they've been through that no one knows. And that's exactly what makes us equal. As she looked at the girl, her eyes now teary, the owner's daughter might begin to understand what the man meant. Empathy is not a burden, but a release. It is not a weakness, but a strength. And the deepest truth he left there, between the lines of his gestures, was that when you learn to put yourself in the other person's shoes, you not only transform their lives, you also transform yours. The pain you help to carry will never be in vain, because it returns to you in the form of understanding, wisdom, and ultimately an impact that can only come from a heart that understands the value of true human connection. As conversations began to spread, and people processed what they had experienced at that moment, a sense of anticipation hung in the air. Something greater was being formed, something invisible but palpable, unfolding before them. What seemed like a simple exchange of bread now turned out to be a turning point in the mentality of everyone who was present. The impact of this revelation, this immeasurable lesson, was beginning to take shape, and it was impossible to ignore what was about to happen. This lesson, as simple as it's profound, could not be forgotten. She touched everyone in a singular way. Each one there, on their own journey, began to see a new path. And this path did not pass through arrogance, indifference, but understanding, empathy. And that in itself changed everything. The girl, now transformed, took a step back, still holding the loaves. Their weight in her hands seemed greater than anything else she had ever carried. It wasn't just bread. They were symbols. Symbols of a turnaround that she, until a few minutes ago, did not even imagine possible. The smile on her face, shy and delicate, spoke more than any word she could have said. It was a smile of gratitude, but also of deep recognition. She knew that at that moment, something inside her had changed. And when she walked out the door of the bakery, with the dignity of someone who had experienced a transformation, she was no longer the same. That girl who once seemed so distant from the reality of others now walked with a new look, a more human, more sensitive look, more connected with what really mattered. The man who had helped her, with his kindness, with his life story, now watched the scene from afar. He didn't need applause or recognition. He knew, in his heart, that what he had done there was not to be celebrated or applauded. It was something that transcends applause. He wasn't looking for a round of applause, but an internal change. And he knew that, even if silently, something had been sown, the seed of empathy, the seed of understanding, the seed of transformation. That simple act had the power to reverberate in lives in ways he couldn't even imagine. But at that moment, the transformation was already underway. In the bakery, silence took over the environment. The owner's daughter, who had been the source of all the tension, stood there, paralyzed, as if she didn't know what to make of the change she had witnessed. She, who once saw herself as the owner of the place, was now being challenged by something that was much bigger than her. Genuine humanity, empathy, the power of true transformation. She looked at the door through which the girl had left and felt a mixture of shame and reflection. The weight of her arrogance now seemed unbearable, and she could no longer look at the people around her with the same eyes. Something inside her was falling apart, and she knew that her journey, right there at that very moment, had also taken a turn. The audience, who had previously just watched everything, was now completely immersed in what had just happened. Nobody spoke. The impact was so great that the words were lost, as if everyone there knew that something greater, something that could not be expressed in words, had occurred. Everyone's eyes were turned to the girl who, with a discreet smile, walked away with the loaves as if it were the most precious thing in the world. She not only took the loaves, but something much more important. She carried with her the lesson of humility, empathy, and recognition of the value of each human being. In that bakery, in that simple moment, a real revolution had happened. It was not a revolution of shouting or confrontation. It was a quiet but profoundly transformative revolution. And what no one could foresee, what no one could anticipate, was that real change did not come from the exchange of material goods, but from the exchange of something infinitely more precious, the exchange of mentalities. It was as if suddenly everyone there had been exposed to a hidden truth, a truth that is not found in books or speeches, but in real life, behind the scenes of human experience. The girl, when she left with her head held high, was a symbol of a journey of transformation that everyone there, in some way, was about to live. And deep down, everyone knew that the lesson she had just learned was not something she would carry alone. She had become, unwittingly, the mirror for others. Each person there, silent and attentive, began to realize that real change was not about what you have, but about how you see others and how you treat them. It was about the small decisions that we often overlook, but that, when made with a heart, can have an immeasurable impact. The silence has been maintained, but in a different way now. It was no longer a silence of tension, but a silence of reflection. Everyone there knew that they could no longer ignore what had just happened. It was as if the pieces of the puzzle of life, hitherto disconnected, began to align in a clearer, more human way. What followed, from that moment on, was a journey that could no longer be the same. The girl, with her loaves of bread as treasures, walked away, but the story was far from over. She was now part of something bigger, of a movement that began, even if silently, to affect the mentality of everyone who was there. Things had changed, and no one could turn back. The impact of their actions, the choices made, would now be seen in a new light, with true transformation taking place, not in words, but in attitudes. The owner's daughter, still in shock, could no longer find her place in that environment. She wondered, internally, if she could still continue living in the same way. The man's actions, so simple and genuine, were making it clear that nothing could be more valuable than human connection, empathy, and solidarity. Now, she was at a crossroads, with her own decisions and choices being tested, in the face of the unvarnished truth of everything that had happened. The bakery, which was once just a common space for commercial exchanges, now became a stage of silent transformation, where everyone who was there began to realize the true impact of small actions and daily decisions. And with that, the girl's journey, and that of everyone around her, was just beginning. As the girl walked down the street, now farther from the bakery, the world around her seemed to have changed. Something in the air was different, as if a new energy had spread, silent but intense. She wasn't sure what had happened there, but she felt that the walk back home would be different from any other walk she had ever done. It wasn't just because she was taking bread with more dignity, or because she had received a gesture of unexpected kindness. It was because, suddenly, she understood the power of small actions, of words that were not spoken, but that were felt deeply. At that moment, she was no longer alone. Her story, without her realizing it, had touched so many lives there, in ways she still didn't understand. And that's exactly what makes the difference. What happens behind the scenes of our lives, in what is beyond the obvious, the words spoken or the visible gestures, can be the key to the impact that often only reveals itself with time. Each gesture, no matter how simple it may seem, has the power to trigger a gigantic transformation. And that's what people sometimes don't see, the impact they generate in the world with their daily attitudes. It seems that everyone, at some point, has been invisible to someone, and many times, it is not out of malice, but due to lack of perception, haste, and the wear and tear of routine. What we saw in this story was a small gesture of empathy, but it made all the difference to the girl and, in some way, for everyone who was there. Perhaps, if we stop to think about it, we were invisible at some point, too. Perhaps we have been that person who, for some reason, did not see the other, did not give it necessary attention, did not perceive the suffering behind a smile or the effort hidden behind a mask of calm. How many times, Throughout our lives, have we ignored what seemed invisible? How many times have we looked at someone and not realized what they were really carrying, what they really needed? Now, if the girl's story touched you in any way, maybe it's because it's also a reflection of something that is inside each of us, the ability to change, to connect, to perceive. Perhaps we all have, somewhere within us, the ability to be the hand that raises, the look that understands, the word that brings hope. But before we are able to offer this to the other, it is necessary to look at ourselves, reflect on the times we fail to see others, and think about what it cost us and what could have been different. Each person who appears in our lives, even if it is in a brief instant, carries a story. And this story may be the key to something deeper that we have not yet been able to see. The simple fact of being noticed, of being recognized, of being treated with dignity, can be the turning point for someone, just as it was for the girl. The simple fact that someone cares can change the course of a life. It can give strength to continue. It can give hope back. Sometimes it doesn't take much. They are not grand gestures or perfect words. All it takes is a recognition that the other, in some way, is part of us. And in this recognition, there is a power that many times life makes us forget. Transformation starts from within, but it has the power to reach everyone around us. What we do with our decisions, with our daily actions, resonate more than we imagine. Have you ever stopped to think about it? How many times throughout your life have you been ignored, left aside, as if you didn't matter? Or perhaps you were responsible for ignoring someone, thinking that their needs were more urgent, more valid. There is no judgment in this. We've all gone through times when we can't see beyond our own pain, our own struggle. But what about when we can see the other? And when we manage, with a simple look or a gesture, to give the other the feeling that he is seen, that he matters. This reflection is not just about the girl or the man in the bakery. It's about all of us, about how we can often be agents of change in the lives of those who cross our path, without us needing much to do so. Sometimes, all it takes is a moment of genuine attention, a smile, one word, the simple act of looking at the other and, for a second, try and understand what they are really experiencing. This can transform a life. This can be the key that opens the door to a new journey. And this journey often begins with the realization that we are not alone, that our pain does not define us, and that kindness can change the course of a story. And as we reflect on this, we can ask ourselves, how many times have we missed opportunities to be the change we so much desire in the world? How many times, without realizing it, have we ignored someone who was actually asking us for something simple, a little dignity, a little attention, a little humanity? At this moment, while everyone's eyes are on the girl who walked away with her loaves, there is no applause. There is no need for applause. The impact is in the silent reflections of those who witness what just happened. And perhaps that is what makes all the difference. It is not the applause, but the internal changes, the small but powerful transformations that happen when we decide to be more human, more attentive, more empathetic. The journey of each of us, like that of the girl, is being written in every decision we make, in every act of kindness, in every time we choose to see the other not as invisible, but as a person who deserves to be recognized, valued, and respected. And who knows, the next time someone crosses our path, we can realize that, more than anything, what matters most is to give the other what he really needs. To be seen, be understood, to be treated humanely. Because, in the end, true transformation doesn't just happen in those visible moments, but rather in the silent changes, the ones that happen within us. And it is this inner transformation that has the power to change the world around us in a profound and lasting way. If this story touched your heart, like the video, share it with someone who needs to remember the value of empathy and leave it here in the comments. Have you ever been despised?